Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Linda Moss-Mines. Linda is Chattanooga's historian. Her life reads like a masterclass in understanding American history. She is dedicated to reminding the public of the blessings of liberty and our commitment to work toward the promises of the American dream for all citizens. Linda, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we jump into your life history and what created your love of American history, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Oh, strong coffee, a little bit of cream, some Splenda, and promises and hopes.
Promises and hopes. I like that too. Now, earlier you told me the strong coffee comes from growing up on a farm and coffee's strong enough that you had to stir it with a boat paddle.
Well, that's pretty much true. My parents had the old-fashioned pot on the stove with no, as we said, innards.
No innards.
They just put the coffee in the bottom, the water, and they boil that coffee, and it would literally, your spoon would stand up in the coffee.
So how'd you strain out the grounds?
Once it's boiled, you add a little bit of cold water, the grounds sink to the bottom, and the coffee comes off the top.
Oh, I got to try that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like having a French press without the press.
That's a great point. I like that. So thank you for coming. As I said a little bit earlier, we kind of know each other, but we really don't know each other. But you are well known around town and your love of history. And in doing a little background, I'm fascinated with how you grew up. So you grew up in Putnam County on a farm?
I did. Grew up on a farm that had belonged to my great-grandparents and then my grandparents, and my father was the only son. So I grew up one end of the farm, my grandparents at the other end of the farm. We raised beef cattle. We raised corn. You know, we had mules. We had tractors. I was driving a truck by the time I was 7 on the farm for haying time, and it was the best life in the world.
How many acres?
183.
So you still have the farm?
I still have the farm. In fact, during COVID, I built a cottage on the farm for my family. My grandparents' house we had taken down probably 20 years ago, and I built on their footprint because my grandfather was my person. I had promised him when I left for college in 1969 at 16 that I would come back to the farm someday because I knew it would come to me, and I didn't realize it would take me 50 years to build a home there. But I am back on the farm now part-time, and
that's kind of full circle there.
It is, and it's absolutely incredible. I'm a creek, the woods, the creeks, the pastures, the cattle grazing. If I get to heaven and that's not what heaven looks like, I'm going to be really disappointed because I think that's what it should look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you said something just a minute ago that I find interesting. Your grandfather was your person.
He was, unequivocated love and affection. And I was, they were my babysitters. My mom and dad both worked. My dad worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for 53 years, and my mom worked, and my grandfather ran the farm during my early childhood. And if given a choice between being inside with my grandmother or being outside with my grandfather, I was following Pa.
You were his little buddy.
I was his, and he always called me daughter. And I've often told people, even when I would come home from college, I stopped at their house before I would go to Mother and Daddy's house, because if I opened the front door and he happened to be in the living room sitting on the sofa and he saw me, it was instantaneously a smile, and he was up to greet me with a hug. And, we all talk about that heaven.
Yeah.
I have told people for probably decades that if indeed heaven is the way that we picture it, St. Peter needs to get out of the way, because Pa is the first person I want to hug. He is my love of the land, my storytelling, the gregarious nature, his humor, music, all of that came from him.
So how did he get to the plateau then? Because we were talking a little bit about, Scotch-Irish and settling in East Tennessee. Did your grandfather
He grew
have
up
generations there?
Actually, not generations, because the Mosses originally came into South Carolina and came up through Georgia into Meigs County. My great-great-great-grandfather was in Meigs County. In fact, 4 brothers. 2 of them fought for the North, 2 of them fought for the South during the Civil War. One of the ones who fought for the North died at Andersonville Prison and is buried there. The baby brother who fought for the Confederacy was killed at Fort Donelson. So,
literally a family divided.
Literally a family divided. My 3rd great-grandfather moved to Roane County, and from Roane County, the family moved across the plateau and settled in White County and Putnam County. My papa was he was number 14 of 15 that included 2 sets of twins.
Wow.
So, you look at those families in those days, and I know agrarian background, you had large families.
It was your labor force.
Well, free labor at that.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting. Your grandfather was one of 15 and only had 1 child, and I'm one of 7, and I've only got 2. So, so you learn.
Well, you do after a while. In fact, not long ago, I encouraged my daughter and son-in-law. I said, you've got 2 beautiful children. How about a 3rd one? And my daughter's response was, so you're endowing tuition for college and everything. And I went, 2 is a lovely number.
Yeah.
Why mess with perfection?
Yeah, it's funny how accounting and financial needs have come into family planning.
Well, you didn't think about those sorts of things when it was an agrarian society. It isn't, for the most part, any longer. But that history still permeates everything that we do today.
So you grew up on this large farm in Putnam County, and a great influence of your grandfather. Was he a history buff also, or was he just teaching you about the land and the family history?
He was, and, in fact, both of my grandfathers in particular were. My grandmother was a York from Fentress County, so I have that tie-in, because the Yorks are all storytellers. But my other grandfather was the oral historian for his family, so I grew up with the stories of that family. He was also a shape note singing master who traveled the country leading singing schools. My pa, that I grew up next door to, loved history, loved reading, had only gone through about the 5th grade because he was born in 1898, read constantly, as did my father and my mother. I laugh. I tell people I was reading at 4. The first thing, my dad read my bedtime stories to me, so I grew up with Ivanhoe and, all of the Sir Walter Scott stories. Mm-hmm. I grew up with James Fenimore Cooper. My first big crush was Hawkeye and Last of the Mohegans, the Jack London tales. And what was common in all of those, they were all historically based. Mm-hmm. Bonnie Prince Charlie, To Call of the Wild, all of that was history. And we talked history in the term of not only the nation and what the generations had seen, but also in terms of our family's relationship to those historical events, whether it was the American Revolution, the War. I had 3 great-great-great-grandfathers in the War of 1812.
Wow.
And those stories were all things I grew up with. And, I tell folks when we would work in the fields, doing things, my grandfather Moss sang the old ballads of England and Ireland and Scotland, the wearing of the green and all those sorts of things. It's history.
What I find interesting about that is, I think I told you earlier, I grew up in Memphis, and my parents had grown up in Philadelphia, so we were separated from our relatives. My wife, her mom's family grew up in the Knoxville area, mm-hmm. and very much like your family, there is a family historian, and they told stories, and they sang songs, and if you don't experience that growing up, it's a different way to grow up, because our cousins were always in Philadelphia. They were the ones way over there. So we had just our little, well, not little, there's 7 kids, our unit. And that had to be an education in itself.
It was. And I don't know that I understood as a child what a gift mm-hmm. that was, but I do now, looking back, and I'll share stories with good friends, or they'll come to visit me on the farm, and I'll tell stories about things that occurred on the farm, or, wading in the creek or swinging on the grapevines, my one-room schoolhouse experience. Randy Tucker used to laugh and say that he felt certain I was probably the only person who had taught at GPS in the last 50 to 60 years who had started her schooling in a one-room schoolhouse with 1 teacher in 8 grades and 23 students. All of that shapes who you are, and I think because I was surrounded always with storytelling, which is the best form of history teaching, it sort of determined who I was.
And I think that's an important point, too, that storytelling is really how you get that information across. It's not making kids memorize dates and events and things like that.
No, if you get hearts first, and once you get hearts, then people have the interest to engage their heads and look for more detail. But it's, history is nothing more than the story of human struggle.
Right.
And it's, pests and pus and pestilence and war and conflict and joy and, all the things that occur on the bank of the river. If civilization is the river flowing through, then the real lives occur on the banks of that constant thread that's the river.
I want to go back to your, I'll say, idyllic life growing up on the farm. Started in a one-room schoolhouse.
I did.
And through what grade was that?
I did first and third grade there, and the teacher who knew my family allowed me to start before I turned 5.
That's awful young.
Oh, it was, I look back now and I wonder if my grandparents were worn out and just said, go ahead and send her. But Miss Ovie, and I love her to this day. I mean, she's been gone probably 40 years, but she allowed me to start early. It was the best educational experience of my life, Mike, because there were 8 grades, 23 students. I skipped the second grade, but she allowed me, whatever the subject was we were studying, to be with whatever grade where my interest and my skill level was. And it allowed me to graduate from high school at 16 and from college at 19 because of Ovie Thomas. She was that person.
That setup kind of, although we don't have them anymore, it enables the student to organically flow to their highest learning level.
It does. And I look back, and she was the most patient woman because I love learning, and I'm a bit of a squirrel, and I have my first grade report card, which is so funny because there's a note on it to my parents. She knew them because they, we all lived in the same community together, and it said, I can make Linda sit down. I can make Linda stop talking. I cannot do both simultaneously. And I think that's probably the story of my life, too. Life is exciting, and every moment has to count, and you need to bounce a little. So
you start school at a young age. You skip second grade. You get out of the one-room schoolroom. You graduate from high school at 16? I
did, and I was teaching school at 19.
I was just getting ready to ask you about that. So you go to Tennessee Tech, and you get through there at 19. You were in a hurry.
I was, and I don't know that I knew that I was. Now, I was not a particularly social creature because I loved being a student, and that was more important to me than the social aspects. And, I started out, I was in pre-med. I was going to go to medical school because I love science. I love chemistry. I liked math. History was my passion, but I wasn't sure what I could do with that. And I started out in pre-med, and about my junior year, I decided that was not what I wanted to do. I'd actually already begun applying to colleges, doing all of that, and I went home and told my parents, I said, I don't think I want to go to medical school. I really think I want to be a historian and write and teach. And my dad, I mean, it's so funny. I think about it often. He looked at me, he turned and he looked at my mother, and he said, well, there goes the retirement plan.
Dads have a way of doing that.
They do.
What are you going to do with that degree?
And he said, well, whatever you do, you're going to do for probably 50 years, so you better love it.
Yeah.
And
good advice.
And I think he often wondered why I didn't do something differently, but, they knew I loved what I was doing.
One of the things I wrote down is you're a lifelong learner. So you get out of Tennessee Tech, you go to teach is it White County?
White County.
19 years old. I mean, were you teaching 16, 17-year-olds?
Well, it's so funny because I had done my student teaching there. I had been hired, and I came back for orientation when the school year started. The superintendent of schools, a lovely guy by the name of Beecher Cooley, I walked in and...
That's a great name.
Isn't that a great name? And I walked in and I introduced myself, and I said, I'm Linda Moss. I'm your new history teacher at the high school. And he said, how old are you? And I said, 19. And bless his heart, he said, oh, no, you're not. And I went to the junior high. because he said, you will have students who are almost your age.
Yeah.
Nope, you're going to the junior high, which was perfect.
Yeah, that was probably smart.
I loved my 8th graders.
Yeah.
And, I taught during the daytime, and then I did my master's at night and in the summers.
So where were you getting your master's?
Tennessee Tech also. Mm-hmm. And, I formed lifelong friends there that are still a part of my life.
So at Tennessee Tech, you got your master's in?
Educational administration and history still. I had to wallow a little bit in history.
But you didn't quit with your master's.
No, I knew to get into a doctoral program, I needed administrative experience. So I went, applied for a job, was hired, went to Motlow State over in Lynchburg, fabulous group of folks I worked with, and I was an assistant dean, and I ran the co-op program. So it got my foot into, I worked with ARO and AEDC and the UTSI, the Space Institute that was there. I worked with the Air Force, all of those sorts of folks, along with the industry in that region. It was a fabulous experience.
Was this an intentional path that you said, you know what, if I'm going to be a history major, I need to get my doctorate and all this? So were these jobs at Motlow State, Chat State, were they intentional on your path, or were they things that...
They were just sort of things that happened, and I look back now and I think gave me additional experiences and knowledge that I don't know that I knew that I needed, but they have been valuable to me. Motlow State was wonderful because one of the things I did there, all of our events, and I helped plan a lot of the college's events. It's 2-year community college. We're sponsored because we were Motlow State. You can imagine who our benefactor was. It was the Jack Daniels Distilleries and the Motlow family. And the things that I learned from, Brashears, who was their PR director, the number of people nationally who would come in because of Jack Daniel. I also worked with George Dickel Distillery a lot. And it gave me some insight into a business acumen that I didn't necessarily know because I had been a farmer. My parents were farmers. They were agrarian-oriented. I'd been an educator, so I picked up some of that so that when I went back to school and I was working on an EDD at UT Knoxville, but I did my collaterals. I love the law. I've always loved the Constitution. I have to be buried with a pocket Constitution. I keep one in my car all the time in case there's an overthrow of the government.
Well, you never know.
Well, you never know. You got to be prepared. If you're going to memorize scriptures, you need to memorize the Constitution. That sort of goes together.
I'd agree with you on that.
When I went back to work on the EDD and educational administration, I did a year of law school as a collateral, and then I did a business management over in the UT Business School as my collateral because I wanted to do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to put myself in your place because I like learning, but I was so ready to get out of school. I look at my youngest daughter who loves learning, and she's looking at doing the master's and things, and I was just itchy to get out. What is it in you?
I think the more that I study, the more that I research, the more that I write, the more that I know so little. So, I'm fascinated by the law. And then once I come back to teaching, I've spent my summers normally traveling and studying and applying for grants and doing research. And, I spent a summer at Stanford Law, spent a summer at Georgetown Law, spent summers doing all the presidential libraries. I have not done Teddy Roosevelt's library. I need to do his.
Where's his, New York?
New York. Yeah, Sycamore Hills, something.
Yeah.
But there's just, it's like studying World War II, and I love military history. I've always loved military history. A lot of my volunteer work is working with veterans, working with military. But the more that you study about any particular battle, the layers of leadership that are a part of that, the layers of sacrifice, but the instinctive behavior that comes from having been trained, because you never prepare for anything in a way that it's actually going to manifest itself. And I think I feel that way about learning, is there's always another level of learning. So still taking classes and still reading and still digging, and I hope I am when I die.
Well, it keeps you young, too.
I think it does. I like to think that I am growing older, but I'm staying connected.
Yeah, that's important.
It is. I don't want to die before I physically leave this world.
It's a great way to put it. Great way. I want to get to your tenure at GPS, but before you got to GPS, you had 2 jobs in the private sector that I found interesting. McKee Foods and Olin Mills. How does all that tie in with history?
It's funny, when I was at Chattanooga State, one of the things I did is I worked with industry. I was the director of community service, and I did a lot of research sorts of things, worked out of the president's office. And McKee became one of the companies that I worked with. And I have to tell you, and anyone who's out there listening, the McKee family was by far so influential in my life. Jack McKee to this day remains a mentor to me. When you talk about philanthropy, integrity, honoring family and family values, keeping the company closely held, but being driven by, this excellence at everything that you do, they were fabulous for me. And for them to hire me to come in and be their corporate training manager, we developed a supervisory development program while I was there, and they had that commitment to developing their employees. Yeah. The supervisory development program was a 6-month program where I would select 12 students at a time. They rotated through all departments. We did management training. We did personnel law. We did everything that they needed to know to be successful. We did the American Baking Institute program, everything. And the McKees committed that sort of training money to developing their lifelong employees, which is why they have that.
And they did it long before it was not, I don't want to say cool, but commonly accepted. That
early 80s, I didn't know anybody else who was doing that.
Yeah.
And then when I left there, trying to decide, I thought I wanted to go back to teaching and everything, OM2 hired me. And I did a lot of writing for them and did a lot of corporate training for them also, and handled corporate communications back in those early days when we didn't really have computers. When we were still using typewriters.
Yeah.
I am that old.
Explain what a typewriter is. No.
Well, it's almost like that. My grandchildren have no concept of not having a cell phone or being constantly connected. And the Millses are the same sort of family. They were wonderful employees. OM2 and CG Mills and Terry Blunt and I worked very closely together. He was absolutely an incredible leader and mentor, but it was all employee-oriented.
Yeah.
And I loved that about them. And, the Millses remain friends today, but they are friends because they still inspire me. They also, this almost inner drive to give back. And I saw that with the Mills family. I saw that with the McKees family. And I hope, I see that so much in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is, we are nationally known as the most patriotic city in the nation. We're also one of the most philanthropic cities in the nation, especially based per capita.
Yeah.
And the level of wealth here, how much of it goes back into the community is a testament to why Chattanooga is as special as it is.
When I first moved here 25 years ago now, I was trying to meet a lot of people. So I was having lunch or coffee with different folks, and forget who I was meeting with, but I said, how do I get involved with the community? What do I need to do? What would you recommend? And he said, get involved with the United Way. This is the most philanthropic community in the country. Get involved with the United Way. And that was one of the first things I tried to do in terms of not just getting involved, but get on the board and do those kind of things. And it does. It opens doors.
It does. And this is a very welcoming community.
Yes.
I tell people that when someone comes in and they're coming from another part of the country or whatever, I tell them, Chattanooga is one of the places that opens its arms, takes you, will nurture you, and will allow you to become what you want to become. And you can choose the paths you want to walk, but there's always someone there walking alongside you.
That is so true. I thought I'd be here 2 years and then move on. And what I found was, and I still find it today, if you're new, if you come in and you're willing to roll your sleeves up and work alongside with the people getting work done, they welcome you.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that. I came here, I was going to be here at Chattanooga, at Chat State for 1 year, and then I was going to go off somewhere and be a professor, finish my dissertation, become a professor at a university. Well, I didn't finish the dissertation. I am now in the process of going back and trying to get approval to write that dissertation. I'm old enough now, I'm not a threat to anybody's job.
That's great, though.
Well, it is, but I got so involved in life that I just didn't finish it, even though I kept taking classes and everything. But here I am, 45 years later, I'm still here, and this is home.
Well, and based on what I know, it sounds like you found a passion when you got to GPS and headed the history department. I
did. And I mean, it was wonderful. I was teaching the best and brightest that I had taught, because I had taught at college level, part-time and doing those sorts of things. But GPS was just this. I was surrounded by students who, for the most part, really wanted to learn, and we could have these deep conversations, and it didn't matter if I was teaching 8th grade or 12th grade. There was this desire to not just know enough to pass a test, but to know enough to make a difference in life. Mm-hmm. And I think that was part of the school, the way that it had been since its founding in 1906, that there was this desire to make a difference. So education is not in itself your only goal. It is an education that enables you to help others and to make a difference. And I got to teach all the things that I enjoyed teaching. I had colleagues that to this day remain the dearest of my friends. I got to partner with Macaulay and so many wonderful friends there. When I began at GPS, Macaulay and GPS had the coordinate program, so I taught a lot of the guys, and we still do work together. Nick Wilkinson, who is was one of my students, and Nick and I are working together on the 100th anniversary of Soldiers and Sailors. And I look around, and that's a community in its own. Yeah. And, I could wallow in American history, and it was okay to be nerdy there.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I have a question related to GPS being an all-girls school. You're an only child. You're the only daughter. And as you're growing up, was it difficult being a woman in those circumstances? And did that translate to why you enjoy GPS so much?
That's an interesting question, because I've often thought about, my parents never said, you can't bale hay, you can't pull a calf, you can't do whatever because you're a girl. Now, my mom was a really strong role model in that regard, because she was bright, she was creative, but she was a real worker queen. I mean, she knew how to do in fact, she was actually more mechanically inclined than my father. Dad, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry, but it's true.
That's me.
She could fix pretty much anything. But I did love being in a situation where I could encourage girls to be all they were capable of being with no holds barred. And it was no accident that I wanted my daughter to have that experience.
Yeah.
And I think it had a lot to do with shaping her life.
Well, and in teaching at GPS, and you're heading the history department, what was there a particular focus you had that you wanted to get across to them, or just go through a little bit about what that meant to lead the department and lead a new group of young ladies each year?
A new group of young ladies each year, a faculty that sometimes included new faculty. I think I was always driven by the fact that I wanted any graduate of GPS to be a well-rounded student. Was I training future historians? Probably not. A fair number of students might potentially go to law school, might become history majors. But what I really wanted to do, and what I wanted us as a school to do, was to help grow young women who were inquisitive, who wanted to be well-informed, who would become the stewards of the Republic. They might be doctors, they might be lawyers, they might be, moms, they might be whatever they chose, business executives. They were always going to be citizens. Mm. And that was the common denominator. And our joke always, and when I'll see a GPS student now who may be in her 50s, or I see one that may be in her 20s, they all know that what I would tell them always is there will be a day when Linda Moss Mines is going to be drooling at morning point or something. I want you all to rotate and take turns, and once a week somebody comes in and says, Mrs. Mines, the state of the Republic is strong. That was my goal. And they know that, and they remind me of it when they see me. That's still my goal. The state of the republic has to be strong. The dream has to live.
I love that. And I'm going to ask you a question. I don't want to get deep into politics, but more along the lines of civic education. My feeling is that's a big thing that's missing in not just education today, but anyone in their 30s, 40s, and even up to 50s. That seems to have been cut out of education. And why is that such a danger?
You know, it's funny because I served on the Tennessee Social Studies Standards Committee this last year, and we set the curriculum for the state, for all public schools. And civics is a strong part of that, but it's, you know, it happens in the classroom. Does it happen as much as I want it to? No, I think American history should be more than 1 year. I think American government ought to be more than a semester. It should be at least a year. But I think we as parents, we as community leaders also have to create opportunities for people to learn their history, to learn the importance of voting, of being an informed voter, an engaged participating citizen. And we have to somehow, and gosh, I'm going to sound old saying this, but we have to get beyond 30-second media bites, social media in particular, that may not be factually driven. We can't accept as facts things that we don't know that are facts, because we allow it to alienate us and push us apart when the goal is to come together as citizens. You know, I tell people whenever I'm talking history and I'm talking civics, whether I'm at a Kiwanis meeting or I'm at Rotary or I'm in a group of whatever community at a church, I do a lot of talking to groups. The majority of us have the same goals and ideas. We want a safe society where children can grow up and can be productive. We can enjoy our grandchildren. We have a certain level of comfort. You know, maybe it's not incredible wealth because there's a difference between want and need, but we all have a common goal. I think we're often controlled by the vocal 5% on either end of the political spectrum, and we lose sight of the fact that 90% of us are united. We may disagree in the methods to get to that, but that's why we have to be conciliatory. That's why we have to have conversations. That's why we have to join and work together. That can begin being taught in the home, and then it needs to be taught across society, or we're going to lose it.
We talked earlier about Howard Baker. Compromise became a dirty word.
It has.
Problem solving has gone away.
And I don't know why, because through history, whether you're looking at the Greeks and the idea of democracy, for them, you know, total democracy, we're a representative democracy, a republic. But you follow the Romans, you look at the height of learning in the Middle Ages, all the way up through the Renaissance, all the way up until modern times. And it's always been the ability to bring a wide variety of ideas together to meld those, come up with the best possible solutions. No one person has the answer to any question. Mm-hmm. And history tells us that. And how we've gotten away from that. And I mean, I'm not a political creature, but I sure am a history creature. Yeah. And history tells me we are best when we work together. We're a beehive, and it only works if we all work together.
Well, and one of the challenges we have today is it's become team blue or team red. And you can't put a basket full of issues in the red basket or the blue basket and agree upon.
Well, and you can't, and we have to. I think we look at issues and we have to care enough to see how they impact people. And sometimes we're on this side of an issue, sometimes we're on that side of an issue. I would hate to think that I formed my opinions about any one particular issue at 18 and then I never grew from that. I hope I always am willing to listen to other ideas. I may or may not accept them, but to be human is to be part of this society and to learn from each other and to serve each other.
Yeah, that's well put. You taught at GPS 27 years.
I did, of my 45 total.
Of your 40?
Older than topsoil.
What was it like to leave? I mean, because you've got a lineage of students, and was that a difficult decision?
It was. It was. I had actually thought I would do 50 years, and then circumstances were such with family illnesses and everything that I ended up leaving. But I had begun to sort of prepare a path for when I left, even probably 5 years before I thought I would leave, because I'd looked at so many of my friends who had retired and then, for the want of a better word, had become really sort of melancholy.
Yeah. They didn't have a purpose.
Yeah, and I need a reason to be awake every morning at 4:30, which I am, and to stay up late. And so I began to, even while I was still employed and while I was running, and I ran the program, which was PICS, which was Partnership in the Community with our students. So I ran Habitat, I ran Key Club. Those were my student organizations. I began to look at where I could fit more actively in the community once I was retired. And I think that helped my transition. So I left a full-time job, basically for a full-time job.
Well, and I was looking at that. You look more busy now.
Well, my daughter not long ago said, you know, Mom, I think we need to sit down because while you're an intelligent woman, you apparently do not understand the term retired.
Well, let me just throw some of this at you. Some of my current interests: official historian of Chattanooga, Hamilton County, Coolidge National Medal of Honor Heritage Museum, chairman of the American 2050 Commemoration Committee of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, chairman of Chattanooga Parks and Outdoor Commission, Times Free Press local history column, the Sergeant York Foundation, Erlanger Hotel. When do you sleep?
Luckily, I have never needed more than 4 or 5 hours in my entire life. So that helps. And I am invigorated by the people I serve with. You know, I look at the Medal of Honor, and I've been involved there since 2012. Came on the board in 15, came on the executive committee in 17, and now I'm vice chairman. But I get to work with B.B. Bell, who is a great friend, with Bill Raines, with Noah Long, with Frank Hughes, and I mean this wide variety of military leaders that have been. I've learned so much from them, and I've grown. Plus, getting to talk and share the stories of our Medal of Honor recipients. At Erlanger, you know, the docs. I'm working right now with Phil Burns on a project recording the stories of our living older physicians who have retired. The things they've seen in their careers in medicine. Of course, Phil Burns in himself is a trip. I mean, he is the master farmer surgeon.
Wow.
I mean,
Renaissance guy.
Absolute Renaissance guy. He likes to bill himself as a little old Bledsoe County boy, and I keep going, yeah, who believes that one, Phil?
Sounds like Sam Irvin at Watergate.
It does, you know. Yeah, I'm just going to poor mouth myself, but every organization that I've become a part of has allowed me to learn so much more about this community. And I've served, you know, a series of wonderful city and county mayors, have worked with unbelievable commission and council members. You know, being a historian gives you an excuse to sort of just wander around and stick your nose into things, whether you need to be there or not, because it's like, I have a question for you.
Well, you're an observer.
It is.
And then you can put it into context. I want to get a little bit more from you on the Congressional Medal of Honor Museum and why that's so important, why Chattanooga is so fortunate to have it. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound like I'm ignorant, but it seems that it's really only been the last decade that the Medal of Honor has taken on the loft it should, the meaning it should. That it was kind of like, oh yeah, you got it, but now it's really revering.
It is, and it's paying homage to what we value so much in this society, and that is service above self. Mm-hmm. And the Medal of Honor is the epitome of that, because it is the highest military award for combat valor, going above and beyond what anyone would ever expect. And, you know, I grew up in Tennessee, have always loved history, but I don't know that I knew until I came to Chattanooga that Chattanooga was the birthplace of the Medal of Honor, that Andrews Raiders, and of course now I revere the Raiders. I go out to the cemetery and talk to them on a regular basis, as I do with Mr. Coolidge and Mr. Doss and, you know, Ray Duke, who is one of my personal heroes whom I never met. I mean, we are so blessed with that history here. But if someone had asked me in high school about the Medal of Honor, I knew Alvin York was a Medal of Honor recipient because that's part of my family and my extended family. I knew Audie Murphy was a Medal of Honor recipient because my dad loved Audie Murphy movies.
Right.
But I didn't know the story and the history of it. And what we've been able to identify at the National Medal of Honor Heritage Center, our primary goal is education. We're in classrooms every day. Students are in our facility. There are 6 characteristics that every Medal of Honor recipient possesses, and that's commitment, courage, citizenship, sacrifice, integrity, patriotism, and all of that is about others, not about yourself. It is serving, staying strong. So you look at a Desmond Doss and everything he went through, the idea of serving others without having a weapon to protect yourself, being armed, as he said, with his medical equipment and his Bible, and to have accomplished what he accomplished, certainly an exemplary, committed to his ideals and his principles. You look at a Mary Walker, the only female, awarded the Medal of Honor for what she did here in Chattanooga and Chickamauga. Battlefield surgeon during a period of time, first woman licensed as a surgeon in the United States. And she's on the battlefield during a period of time when women weren't even, nursing was a new career for women. It's just unbelievable. Charlie Coolidge, hometown boy. Larry Taylor, our most recent living recipient, now gone.
Yeah.
I look at Larry Taylor, and he sort of reinforces my Scotch-Irish commitment to liberty because, his papers sat on the desk in Washington for 54 years.
That's incredible. Because
he disobeyed a direct command, and he went back and he saved his 4 men, flew them out on a Cobra, defying all flying principles, because he said he was listening to a higher authority than that officer who told him not to get them. Those are the kinds of people that I want my grandchildren to hold as role models.
Does Chattanooga have a predominance of Medal of Honor winners? It seems...
Tennessee has a total of 35 out of all the ones that have been given since the inception of the award during the Civil War. Per population, we're very, very well represented. But what I tell people all the time with the Medal of Honor, you look through the history, the Medal of Honor is not one segment of society. It's rich, it's poor, it's all races. It will become more women in the future because women for a long time were not allowed in combat, and it had to be combat situation. But what it reminds us is those same characteristics that Medal of Honor recipients have, whether you're in the military or whether you are just a citizen in a community or a student in a classroom, those same characteristics can shape your life. It's never the wrong thing to stand up and protect others because ultimately you're preserving a nation where all of us then have a voice. If we're going to be a republic, if we are truly a representative society, we all have a voice, and we have to take care of each other.
That's so well put. I've got a couple more questions before we run out of time.
Okay.
What would you say to someone who's probably in their 20s, 30s, listening to this on the importance of lifetime learning?
I think I want anyone, whatever your age is, to know that we are always a work in progress. We have not yet become a masterpiece. We might not ever become a masterpiece. Love to think that I might be a Rembrandt someday. But, I think the minute we stop learning, we start dying. And, when I was 19, graduating from college, there are things that I am passionately interested in today, aspects of history, conservation, all those sorts of things that I didn't even know were fields of endeavor. The world is constantly broadening. So read those books, travel, talk to people, embrace learning in whatever form it is, because you'll only get better.
Yeah. Before I get to the last question, I do need to remind our listeners who makes all this possible, and it's a huge thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Linda, we could probably talk another 2 hours.
We could.
I've always been a history buff, and Moving to Chattanooga, it's so centric to the Civil War, obviously. And I think we attract people that a lot of folks don't realize that, for example, when Dick Cheney was vice president, he would make regular trips to Chattanooga because I believe he has a grandfather buried somewhere.
And there are lots of even still national leaders who have a connection to Chattanooga, to Tennessee in particular, but to Chattanooga because of Chickamauga being such an incredible battle. Chattanooga, whether it's Missionary Ridge. I mean, I can travel anywhere in the world and mention Missionary Ridge and
they know.
Oh, Civil War, Lookout Mountain, Orchard Knob, Browns Ferry. I mean, we walk in the footsteps of history every day in this community, and we so often forget. And you can't overlook the impact in this community of the Cherokee Nation.
Yeah.
Still a part of our living legacy. You know, our relationship with the Eastern Band, with Qualla Band, with the Western. You know, to think that John Ross, who founded our city, was the longest-serving principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, says something about who we are as Chattanooga. Elected chief in 1828 and served until 1866. Could have not gone on the Trail of Tears, but he chose to go with his people. He was only 1/8 Cherokee, Scots, the rest. But he knew he bridged those two worlds beautifully, and in doing so, in many ways, saved his people.
Yeah, great lesson. And I hope this conversation has spurred some folks to do a little more investigating.
Oh, yeah. Come join us. You know, at the Medal of Honor, we do a free class on Sunday afternoons.
How do they get in touch with you?
localhistorycounts@gmail.com.
localhistorycounts@gmail.com.
We do Tennessee 101, so come join us. We'll wallow in Watauga forward together.
Is it a series of classes?
It's a series of classes once a month, 1 hour Sunday afternoons at 2 o'clock, and I figure I can be doing it when I'm 93.
Exactly. All right, last question for you. And what would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Wow. Find your passion. Surround yourself with mentors, friends, colleagues who know you and support you and allow you to do the same for them, because having those connections gives richness to life. I'm going to drive away from here thinking about that question.
We'll let you come back and answer it more if you want.
I would love to do that. I really do think you constantly have to think about what you leave behind. And I want to know at the end of the day that in some small minor way, because I'm a minor player and I know that and I'm okay with that, but I want to think that I've made some sort of a difference. I think we all need that.
A bit of a leave it better than you found it attitude.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I've been given a lot of blessings. It's my responsibility to make sure others are blessed.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you for doing this. It's great getting to know you better. And I'm serious, we could probably talk another couple hours.
We probably could, but I'm honored that you allowed me to join you today. So thank you. And thank you, TVA, because I love telling your history, too.
It is a great history.
It is a fabulous
They're
history.
very good to us.
They are.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.